Screw this. Screw all that. I'm over it. Heaven. So it's a little chilly out in the garage tonight. I haven't had the heater running real long, but we're pushing, we're getting up to 45 degrees or so. Warm enough to get working again. And tonight, we're gonna get going on finally checking valve lash. And I'll show you the whole process for that. I don't know that everybody knows how the valve train on these motorcycles is set up. And I know some people, there's a lot of people that do, but I'm thinking there's a lot of people that watch this channel to maybe get a little just overall knowledge of stuff. And I'll just kind of show how the valve train is set up and how you actually set and check lash without the cylinder head even being on the motor. So this will be like my baseline setup so that when the head goes on, I know my lash will be good and we'll be able to fire it up. So let's get going on checking this thing out. So one of the first things, like if you're going to get into working on cylinder heads or doing your own stuff, best thing you can do is just have a huge assortment of valve shims. Buy them off eBay, buy little kits, but try to have at least, if you're going to have any, try to have at least 8 of every size. And I don't mean every size like numerically in order, but at least 8 of every size that you have on hand. And the reason being is when you start, from scratch like this, these are the valve shims. They all sit on top of the valve tip and they sit down in the retainer. There's a little recessed area in the retainer. And that valve shim is actually what that inside part of the bucket touches. So that's how you end up setting your valve lash, is the different thickness of that shim changes where that bucket ends up sitting, and then the cam rides on that bucket. So if you got a thin shim in there, that bucket will sit low away from the cam, increasing your valve clearance. Likewise, if you go with a thicker shim, it'll raise this bucket up, it'll ride on the cam lobe harder with less clearance. So you'll need to kind of know what specs you want to run at. I'm just kind of going off. This is something I don't really, stray too far from the norm on. So what I'll do is run about, these are the specs actually for my exhaust side. 8 to 10 thou cold intake, 6 to 8 thou cold. The reason you can run a little tighter on the intake side is the intake side sees less heat. So obviously intake valves don't see exhaust heat temperature. The exhaust side does, and then you'll want a little extra clearance on those when they're cold, because that exhaust side, everything's going to tighten up a little bit faster than the intake side will. But what I'm going to do now is I already went through and I know roughly what valve shim area measurement wise I'm going to end up in. So these are all 1.8 millimeter shims, and this is why I said you want to get 8 of at least whatever size you have, because now I can put all of the same size shim in here. I'll put the buckets on. Obviously I want to put some assembly lube in this thing because we are going to rotate things over. Then I'll drop I'm doing the exhaust side first here, but then we'll drop the exhaust cam in, bolt down the cam cap, which is down there. I got to clean that up yet. So we'll bolt down the exhaust cam cap, and then we'll rotate the cam by hand with a tool, and then we'll check from the base circle of the cam lobe, we'll check our clearances. So let's get going on getting some lube in this thing and dropping some buckets in place. All right, I got the exhaust cam bolted in, as you just watched me do. I'm gonna go grab my feeler gauges now, and then I'll show you. I just use channel locks to turn that gear, and I got the tips kind of ground a little different, so they actually fit. You know, they'll fit in there, and I'm not actually damaging the teeth on the sprocket at all when I turn it. Just cheap little budget way to be able to rotate the cam over. So now we'll get going on actually checking the clearance. I already got written down here, you know, what my clearance should be. These are my shim sizes in there already. And then what I'll do is I'm going to measure all the way across. I'm going to write down what my clearance actually is, and that'll tell me what shims I need to change out to either increase or decrease my clearance. So here's my pliers with my little tips. I kind of pointed up on these things to grab the gear a little easier. So first thing I'm going to do is just I'm going to roll the cam over in the. I like to roll everything in the direction the motor actually runs. So I'm going to spin the motor over, or spin the cam over, and kind of just get everything sort of seated in there. Make sure the the buckets and everything's kind of just lined up and good to go. Making sure everything spins free, and then we'll get number one onto the base circle of the lobes, and then we'll start checking clearances. Right there's where we'll start. So you can see I got my lobes set here, so they're down. Base circle is where I'll set the my clearance at, and I've done this a few times already. So I got my feeler gauges kind of all grouped together for what I'm going to need. The spec on the exhaust side is 8 to 10 thou. With this thing being non-water cooled turbo motor, I'm going to lean towards that 9 to 10 thou range. I don't like to set anything real tight, because if anything happens, it's actually this clearance is going to tighten up more than anything. So I'm going to shoot for about 9 to 10 thou on the exhaust side, and that's cold again. So first thing I'm going to check is 9 thou, and that actually it feels pretty good, but we might be able to get a 10 thou in there. And if that's the case, I'm going to leave it alone. There we go. That's about the right amount of drag that I want on that. We'll try 11 thou just to be, be safe here, so we know. Yeah, I can't even get 11 thou in. Doesn't go. So, just dumb luck that having done this so many times in the past and knowing roughly where my valve shim size always ends up, and again having, new valves, everything's in good condition. Those clearances should all kind of come out like that. So we'll check this one more time. Here's my 10 thou feeler. 10 thou. Just the right amount of drag. So I'm going to continue on down the line here. So first run through on my valve lash, here's where we're at. We got 10 thou, 1 and 2, 10 and 12 thou on 2 and 3. Sorry, 3 and 4. I'm an idiot. 5 and 6, good. 7 and 8, 8's a little loose. So 8 and 4, I'm going to tighten up a little bit. And like I said, I have 1.8 millimeter shims in there. Looking at my assortment here, I can probably go next one over. Where are we got? 1.8, 175s, 195, 90, 1.85. That's what I'm looking for. And that should tighten them up just enough. So now I'll pull that back apart. We'll change out 4 and 8. So I got those 2 valve shims switched out. I'm going to put this back together, and then we're going to double check our clearances. And we just need to get those 2 that were around 12 thou. We need to bring them back down to about 10. 9 or 10 is what I want. So we'll throw it back together and test it again. I'm not testing anything. I'm going to measure it. I'm going to check it with measurements. And there we have the exhaust side is shimmed and set. I got my numbers written down here. That's where I had to change the shims out on these 2. That was a little handwriting mishap. But I got my 10 thou clearance that I wanted all the way across. So I'll have to duplicate the same thing now on the intake side. And I'll probably start with something similar shim wise. I'll find, in my assortment here, I'll find a 175. Oops, just tip that over. A 180, somewhere in that range is where I'll start, but I'll get 8 all the way across the board. I might even have some, the 185s. I probably got 8 of them in there, so I'll start with those. It's rare. I shouldn't say rare. It could happen that you would end up with the same size shim all the way across, but it's not uncommon to have a couple that you need to change to get your lash just right. Could be an issue with maybe I lapped one valve too hard. I don't know. But that's why they make valve shims in different sizes and pretty tight sizes too. So you can dial it in to get it just right. There's all kinds of tolerances in manufacturing processes, and sometimes dimensions stack. And what that means is if you're 2 thou, if something's got plus or minus 2 thousandths tolerance on this thing, and you get plus or minus 2 thou on this thing, by the time you get to the end, you can be 6 thou, 7 thou out on your overall dimension. I'm just speaking generally here, not talking about this head in general, but that's dimension stacking, where every individual thing might be in tolerance. The overall thing is out of tolerance. So without knowing exactly what their tolerances are on stuff like this when they make it, we just know that I had a couple that were slightly off, and it's minuscule amounts. So I do have it all dialed in how I want it, and now we'll do the intake cam and get that all set up next go around. But I won't bore you with that because you just watched me do the one cam. Second cam's the same stuff. So that's going to wrap up that video for tonight. Hope maybe you learned a little bit something about setting valve lash and just kind of the overall, design and what parts are in there. I know some of you maybe have never even had a valve cover off of a motor before, so that's kind of what it looks like. But I've been struggling to find time to get out here lately. Just a lot of other stuff going on. I was doing some house projects, and feels good to actually be back out in the garage. But instead of just not doing anything, you know, like, oh, I don't have enough time, I'm not going to get started. I'm going to try to come out here and at least, you know, if I got a couple hours to kill, I'm going to try to get something done. So me just doing, you know, setting valve lash on one intake cam tonight. It's 12 degrees outside. We're not going racing anytime soon, but spring and, you know, race season is coming. But if I can do one thing like that each chance I get when I come out into the garage, we're gaining ground, and that's kind of all we can do. So if I can buckle up and come out in a cold garage and do some shit like this, you can too. So go start a channel, go make something cool, go show people what you're up to. It's fun. So we'll see you in the next video. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in a couple days. We'll see you later.